Good morning, and thank you for attending this session on impactful design. My name is Alice Leguay from Standard Deviation, and I'd like you to take a look at your shoes. Take a look at your shoes and think about how they were designed. They started from a sketch in someone's mind, and then, only then, were the resources necessary to make them sourced from all over the world. So it could be Italian leather, if you're lucky, rubber, fiber from Egypt. But let's put that into a little box, call it the old view, and get rid of it. Come in the new view, as we say at Standard Deviation. And it goes something like this. A designer steps into a landscape. They look at what grows from a balanced ecosystem, what resources can be extracted without depleting that ecosystem. And only then do they put pen to paper and design that shoe. Now that's impact at the core of design. That's the designer taking their brief directly from nature. And you're probably thinking how messy that could be. Your seasons will change, your crops will fail. How can a designer embrace that messiness in their work? If you think of ecology, we think about the intersection of two ecosystems, a river flowing into the sea, where there is the most biodiversity and innovation. Translate that into our human society, and that could be a farmer working together with artisans and a designer. Biodiversity, diversity, innovation all live in a certain amount of messiness in just balance. And that just balance is essential. At this point, I'll bring in our keynote speaker, Justine Laurent, co-founder at Circulab. Justine, welcome. And Justine is an expert and a visionary when it comes to bringing businesses into that fertile, playful area that is living systems design. Thank you, Justine.
Thank you, Alice. Hi, everyone. I'm really happy to see you today. I know you didn't come only for me, but still. Well, today we'll speak about impactful by design. And to start with, I would like everyone here to know that I believe in one thing, that everyone in this room and even everyone in this event can create positive impact. Why? Because we all design. And design can change the world. You'll ask, how is she so sure? Well, I'll start with a simple question. Please raise your hand. Who among you cook? Wow. Maybe some of you, among the ones who cook, will spend time doing it, will take time to find the best recipe, the best ingredients, and invite all your favorite people around the table. Maybe some of you will cook only when you have time, and you will make it simple, and you will try to make it quick. In both situations, despite the differences, you have one thing in common. You make choices in order to answer and achieve a specific objective, a specific purpose. Maybe it's to eat, maybe it's to, I don't know, impress someone, maybe just because you like it. In both situations, you design. We are not all designers, but we all design, because design is making choices for a specific purpose, making connections between different elements so that we will achieve a specific objective. Everything around us is design. Your shoe, as Alice said, this mic, this room, this event. And all these different things have impacts. And those impacts can be positive or negative. And those impacts will be not only during the use, but also before the use and after the use. Let's get back to the kitchen. Regarding the ingredients you'll choose, regarding the time you'll spend in the kitchen, regarding the recipe you'll choose, it may impact your health, your welfare, even your relationship with your friends. But it will also impact the farmers that make your food grow, well, the soil that made your food grow, also the vendors who enabled you to have access to those ingredients. So you understand we all design, and the impact of design design has long-term impact and consequences. The European Commission estimates that 80% of the environmental impact and cost of a product are determined at the design stage. The European Commission doesn't say that when you design, you create those impacts, but says that when you design, you will basically make the different choices that will have those long-term consequences. And as I said, those impacts can be positive or negative. You can decide when you design to increase biodiversity or to damage it. You can decide to answer fundamental needs of most people or to enrich just a few people. You can't act on impact. It will be way too easy. But you can act on design. So the question is how to make those impacts positive. We will see it in a few seconds on the screen. Basically, the first thing, my first recommendation when you design is to think global. Alice spoke about just balance. In order to understand what we mean by just balance, I will start with this team here you see on the screen. Let's get back to the kitchen. Some of you may be what we would call rational cook. The rational cook is the one that will cook what is feasible and viable. So you'll try to match kind of your budget with your know-how and capacity to cook. This is great. But then we have the user-centric cooks. The one who basically will try to understand who are the users. So basically, what are the tastes of your guests? What are your own tastes? What would you like to eat, but also what do you need? So here arrives a third sphere, which is desirability. So basically, you will not only have rationality, but you will add on the top of it creativity and empathy. So here you will cook for desirability, viability, and also feasibility. This is a lot. But as you know, it's not enough. There is something missing here. This sphere would be nature. Why? Because when you cook at home, not only you need to think desirability, viability, feasibility, but also circularity. You need to ensure that everything that leaves your kitchen will not have negative impact on the soils that made your food grow. With this fourth sphere, we encompass biomimetics, but also, inspiration by nature, so biomimetics. We also speak about ecosystems, biodiversity. So this is my first recommendation in order to have positive impact when you design, to have a just balance between those four spheres. There is a chef based in Ile-de-France. So his restaurant is Le Saint-Pierre. His name is Jean Talon. And he's a chef who is already a holistic chef. Because when he cooks, not only he make it, as I said, viable, feasible, circular, and desirable, but the food is very, very good. When he cooks, basically, not only he will adapt the size of the meal to the needs of the different users around the table, and he will make it evolve in the months, but also he will use every leftover he has in order to create new recipes. So he will have jam, he will have, I don't know, like some super good apple pie and things like that with all the leftovers. So he doesn't have any leftovers. He's impressive, and he is an holistic cook. But let's continue with impactful by design. This is my first recommendation, and my second recommendation in order to have positive impacts is not to think only about the product or the service, but to think about the whole system around it. Let's get back to the kitchen. When you cook at home, don't think only about the meal. Think about the whole experience. Who will be around the table? Who are your guests? Who are the people, as I said, who made your food grow? Where are you going to buy your food? Because at all of this stage, and also regarding who you have around the table, the experience and the impact will not be the same. So don't cook only the meal, but design the whole experience of cooking and also of eating. If we go back to the business and to the companies, basically, not only design the product and service, but also think about the business model around it. How will I distribute it? How will I work with my partners? How will I make the user experience great? Because, for example, a modular phone, if I don't have the spare parts to repair it, if I don't have the know-how, it's just modular. It doesn't have positive impacts. But if I enable people to repair it at home, if I enable the printing of spare parts with 3D printing, for example, it will have positive impacts. And think only about the different ecosystems around it, the natural one, but also basically the human ecosystem. Because when you design, you will have impact everywhere here. We will leave the kitchen, but we will stay in the food area because I love food. I will give you 3 examples of some companies, organizations who think that way. I will have another question for you. Please raise your hand, the one here who pee. If you don't raise your hand, it's not a good idea, a good news. Okay. There is a company called 2P Organics. Maybe you know them. 2P Organics transform pee into super powerful fertilizers. Someone could say they sell fertilizers, but no. They not only design the fertilizers, they design the whole system around it. And what they do is they basically install hygienic containers at professionals, they collect the pee, and then they transform it into fertilizers. And not only the fertilizer is super good for the plants, the vegetables, and so on, but also for the soils, because it regenerates it. So 2P Organic act in the agri-food system, but like positively, designing fertilizers. Another example is in Vietnam. This company is called Les Vergers du Mekong. Maybe you know it, maybe you don't. Les Vergers du Mekong sells jam, juice, nothing very original. But as you guess, they don't only do that. What they did is when they designed these products, they thought about the whole ecosystem, and specifically about who to work with, the farmers. Because they knew that in Vietnam, for example, and in the whole Mekong Delta area in region, the soils is of a very good quality. So they decided to work closely with the farmers, thanks to pilot agroforestry farm. They also collect and produce compost, for example. And thanks to that, they have very good products, vegetables and fruits. They transform it into high-quality products they sell to restaurants, for example. But they also enable the farmers to keep their jobs and to improve themselves in the continuity. The last example I'll give is disco soup. So now we are no more in Vietnam. We don't speak anymore about pee, but we still speak about food. And disco soup, wanted initially to raise awareness against food waste. They could have designed a sensibilization campaign and stop here, but they said no. We will make it even more powerful, and we will create even more impact, and we will, above all, make it more funnier. This is why Disco Soup, that was born in Germany in 2012, 2012 and now exists, for example, in Paris, is a movement that will gather and collect all the leftovers from supermarkets, wholesalers, and transform it and cook it with families, with neighbors, so anyone who wants to join the event into good meals. And doing so, not only they will raise awareness, but they will also have a good time together. And the good news is, why disco soup? Not only you eat soup and you cook it, but you also have a good time dancing. Not only on disco, sometimes you have electro and things like that, but it's very good. So here again, they design the whole experience and not only the sensibilization campaign. So to finish with, now we understood we all design, and this design can have positive impact. You'll say, yeah, it's too complicated. We can't do it. Yeah, we can. I do believe we can. But I do agree with you, we need to change our mindsets. So to finish with, I have 3 recommendations. The first one, and you will speak about it later, foster cooperation rather than competition. Cooperation not only will make it more fun, because cooperating with people is way more motivating and way more fun than competition, but also it will enable you basically to create what we call shared value, for example. My second recommendation will be to define well the function, the why, the raison d'être, the purpose, whatever the name you give to it. Why am I doing it? Why the people are going to use it? What is the need you answer to? When you know the need can be enable people to move. It can be enable people to be in good health. When you have in mind this purpose, well, basically it will be way easier to create positive impacts. And my third recommendation would be to change the metrics and the tools. Why? Because remember that design is making choices for a specific purpose. If this purpose is growth and GDP only, it will be quite complicated to create qualitative positive impacts because those metrics are quantitative. So try to balance also those indicators and metrics and use the right tools from the design stage. So next time you will be in your kitchen, I hope you'll be an holistic cook. And I'm sure if you can be an holistic cook in your kitchen, you can do the same thing in your business. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Justine, for that impactful design soup and just balance as the main ingredient. Thank you. Okay. I'd like to introduce the second section of this session, our panel of 3 designers who all work with holistic design in their practice and cultivate that fertile messiness that I spoke about initially. Welcome, Nick, Pierre, Henriette. Welcome to the stage. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. For some of you, you come from far away. Sorry, I've messed with my mic. I'd like to introduce all 3 people here on stage today. As I say, they come from very different backgrounds. Pierre, you're CEO and co-founder at Notpla. Notpla, for those of you who haven't been on their website, I encourage you to watch the 1-minute video, which is awesome and pretty much made from Pierre's iPhone. It's 1 minute long. So Pierre has a huge task ahead of him and a very bold vision, which is to replace every item of disposable plastics globally with his seaweed-based material. We'll come back to that. Nick Rhodes. Nick, you are head of the Ceramics and Product and Industrial Design course, the award-winning course from Central St. Martin's. And Nick has a unique privilege, is that every day he spends time with cohorts of young students from all over the world who have creative minds and putting their minds to work with him. And that is something that we don't really have the chance to do in this room very often. Nick, I'm sure they're very lucky to have you as well. Henriette Waal is the head of Luma, Atelier Luma at the Luma Foundation in Arles. And Henriette works with a very strong sense of place, looking for solutions in the Arles region, in the Arles bioregion, actually we'll come back to that, to transform waste with the support of local communities. Let's dive right in. Actually, Henriette was the inspiration for the shoe metaphor from the beginning. You probably wondered where that came from. Henriette, would you like to tell us a little bit about the shoe that you grow in Arles? And the interesting thing about that piece of work is that not only is it a very local idea initially, but you have ways to make it grow and scale it globally.
It's not, oh yeah, it's working. Thank you for the introduction. Yeah, the shoe, it's called Footprint, and it's a project in which we prototype in our bioregion a shoe from like combining different future materials. And it's yeah, very interesting product, a shoe, because different materials come together, and it's wearable. So it's like in Atelier Luma, we've worked a lot on biomaterials for architecture, but now we wanted to work on a wearable as well. And yeah, for instance, future material for France is, for instance, hemp. And what is interesting is that when you start working on this shoe, this brings all kind of conversations, like with local farmers, for instance, like to improve the quality of this hemp. But also, like with climate change, we have new materials coming in, so new rubbers, for instance, that we work with for this shoe. So it's not only a design of an object, but also we create the ecosystem around this product, and this is really something yeah, we're very good at, I think, in Atelier Luma. And like this, so it's a method and approach that can be repeated in other regions, but then will lead to other kinds of designs and other kinds of materials.
So you work with partners in Egypt as well, right? You send them the design that you've devised in Arles, and what do they do with it?
Well, it's not really. It's really about going there and prototyping with existing machines and communities in Egypt. But for instance, there we connect traditional crafts with science innovation, but it's really working with Egyptian resources. So we don't bring the innovative materials that we developed in Arles to Egypt, but there we work on a new concept. So yeah, we did some project outside of our region already, but this is really something an approach we would like to broaden. Yeah.
And interestingly, I mean, Pierre, Paslier, at Notpla, your approach has always been global from day one. So in a way, you're turning the concept on its head, and you're coming at it from a top-down approach. You are looking for a global ingredient to make a global solution to tackle a global problem. Do you see any similarities with Henriette's work?
Yeah, I think that there is obviously kind of like a global need to tackle plastic pollution. The problem is really kind of like knows no frontier. Like the plastic goes everywhere. It doesn't really matter where it kind of like was consumed. It will end up being a global problem for any of the communities that are impacted. That being said, I think, yeah, we need to kind of like find the right balance between global and local. And I think that there are things that like will always need this adaptation to a local application. We use seaweed, but seaweed is an incredibly diverse resource. There's 12,000 species. They grow on every coastline on the planet, and we really try to use this diversity to create all of those solutions. And the goal is that as we grow, if Notpla is present in Australia, we will use Australian seaweed rather than using French seaweed. So it really is about finding the thing that like gets you started to have impact, but then really looking for the opportunities to make it work on a local scale. But I think that there is this need to kind of like see how we can propagate ideas to really like make them catch on globally, so that we have the fastest time to kind of like impact.
So you also design with a sense of place on a global level.
For sure. And in a way, we design with a sense of place because everything that we create is naturally biodegradable. So we choose the materials and we design the products so that wherever they end up in nature, inadvertently, because we don't want people to litter, but inevitably they do, that like those choices, those kind of like materials that we picked, they are able to break down without any human intervention. So there is a sense of place. It needs to work being biodegraded in the ocean or in a forest. Literally right now we have some of our samples that are in a gut whale simulation to really make sure that wherever it ends up, it doesn't create a long-lasting waste. And that takes like a focus on each of those different places because that's where your things can end up in.
And Nick, if I can bring you in at this point, because co-creation is a very big part of your work, and you do that globally with partners all across the planet. How is tech central to that co-creation?
Tech tech is really important because we're in a really interesting phase now where you can actually act globally and locally simultaneously. So fourth industrial revolution technologies like big data, robots, cobots, blockchain technologies, quantum computing is quite a long list, but are actually allowing for folks to work to engage stakeholders in local spaces directly. And so moving away from this larger paradigm of production around mass manufacture, the first industrial revolution, which produces a lot of waste and requires big supply chains and distribution, you can actually get to the needs of very, very specific groups of people in very, very specific locations. And to give them, actually to collaborate with them to produce impacts and outputs that are really suitable to that place and that locale and those particular set of circumstances.
So that could be a 3D design using materials local to one of you co-creators.
Yes, absolutely. But I think the critical part of this is the way in which this facilitates the co-design and co-production with the people who are actually going to be using the outputs of the design, which is really sort of interesting because it dissolves the traditional professional barrier of what a designer does from being someone who consults to deliver a solution to somebody who presents a permeable membrane of input to co-create and co-design and co-produce things that are truly relevant to those people who are on the receiving end.
And back to that point about technology, I mean, we talk about the materials of tomorrow, and those materials look very different from depending which standpoint you're looking at it. For Henriette, and Henriette, I'd like to get into your project about rice in Arles, and I recommend you go and see it as well. It's called May Your Rice Never Burn, and that project has ancient craft at its core. So my question to you, Henriette, is how do you bring ancestral knowledge that forward into the future, or into the present, and then hopefully also into the future? How does that ancient knowledge add value to your impactful creation?
Well, first of all, I think it's very important that ancient knowledge is very deep in a culture. So it's in a way like how to connect cultural heritage and design. And on this stage, we spoke about it before today. But like to come back to the rice, so when I started with the Atelier Luma in 2016, like this rice straw was burned like all over the region, and this is a ritual that has been going on for years and years. So it's a behavioral change. It's not only a matter of like using a waste stream. So it's really this project, May Your Rice Never Burn, was really to prototype a new ritual, so not only a technical solution. So what we did was we made like a large geotextiles like from this rice straw. So it was really about the knowledge of weaving, like communal weaving, involving like farmers, citizens, etc. in this activity, ecologists, like different perspectives. So different people came together, and like this, like working on these geotextiles, like all together, it serves as a conversation piece. Like in these geotextiles were applied to comfort the dunes, like the dunal ecosystem, and we monitored like how what the effect was on the dunes of these geotextiles. So basically, this project now can move in a more like technical phase where we work on the rice straw as like to improve more the materials we make from that, because we also worked on like isolation panels from it, etc. And by now, like 6 years or 7 years later, you see that in the region, like it's very hard to find any rice straw that is still burned. So it's also like a really a shift in people's minds that we try to add to with this project, May Your Rice Never Burn. So it's really not only like technological innovation that we do, but also we look at this like how materials are anchored within a region and how to work with that in a project.
Thank you. And I'd like to move the conversation on to a topic that Justine brought up, which is desirability. How attractive should these products be? And you're nodding, Pierre, because you know how attractive your products are. They're beautiful. And Nick, you work with ceramics, you're an artist. Desirability is at the heart of that activity. And you've also worked with LVMH on building a brand that is both luxury and sustainability, which in most people's minds could be mutually exclusive. How did that come about, and where do you put desirability in that process?
Absolutely. Desirability is central to persuasion, which is essentially what design does. And that's particularly pronounced in the luxury sector. We are really privileged at Central St. Martin's to have an ongoing project running with the LVMH group, which is called Maison Zero, which is turning out all sorts of interesting project opportunities. But in terms of your question around the exclusive and the inclusive, which I think we're talking about here, I've been working and running projects globally looking at this as an issue. The luxury and premium sector is really important as a generator of jobs, income in Europe in particular, and needs to be understood in a very nuanced way in order to grow and to thrive in new cultural contexts as well. The idea that sustainability and luxury consumption might be in tension with each other, I think is a misunderstanding. And it's conflating two different ideas. Luxury product or service is exclusive by nature. You know, it does include some, but keep some out. That's how it provides some of its frisson and presence. Whereas socially engaged practices are inclusive. And this is what I'm talking about. When I'm talking about sustainability, I'm primarily not talking about environmental sustainability rather than focusing on social inclusion and social sustainability. And of course, they're innately linked. But this idea that there's a tension is a misunderstanding, because the products and services, yes, they're exclusive, but the way in which a business delivers what it does can be entirely inclusive. So the project that I've run now in London, in Paris, in China as well, and other places, is really inviting design students to examine the possibilities. Is it feasible to design a luxury brand based on principles of social inclusion and purpose from the outset? And interestingly enough, it is. And it's a very, very exciting propositions that have emerged.
Thank you, Nick. And actually, back onto you, Pierre. You realized as you were building your product based on on some of the seaweed, that there was waste from that process. And your lab, you and your colleagues, figured out a way to use that waste. How important was beauty and desirability in what you were making out of that waste? And perhaps you can tell us about what the outcome of that process was.
Yeah, so for many of our products, we use the gelatinous part of seaweed. We don't really realize, but like you can get kind of a jelly out of the seaweed, which we use for coatings and for our edible packaging and so on. But that represents, depending on the species, maybe like 10 to 40% of the seaweed. The rest is actually the fibrous, green, kind of like mush body of the seaweed that, as it stands, we were kind of like leaving on the side because we were focusing on the gelatinous part to start with. And you can use that as a fertilizer for local agriculture, but that doesn't have really high value. And we realized that actually in our world of packaging, we could turn that into paper. So we started to make seaweed paper with these fibers. And that paper has a very strong kind of like visual appearance because it has like big chunky fibers of seaweed. It doesn't smell too strong of seaweed, but there's still a little bit of like leftover smell from where it comes from. So it is a very honest product. It is really something that looks almost like a marbled kind of like paper. And what was really interesting is that essentially this is a waste. So this is not kind of like where the first intention was. When we extract stuff from seaweed, we were starting with the gelatinous part. But because of that strong texture and origin story that is very apparent onto this paper, we had a huge interest from like cosmetic products and from fashion because they were seeing something that was actually telling a very strong story. And I think that at the end of the day, when a brand chooses to use a certain material is to really kind of like get that narrative right of like what is it that they're trying to do. And I think that especially we have a cosmetic brand that is kind of like by the sea, using a lot of seaweed in their products. There was just a wonderful kind of like circularity in this. So yeah, what stemmed from like the aspiration to use the entire seaweed, not leave some part behind, created actually a very strong kind of like additional product in our portfolio.
Thank you. We only have a few minutes left, and there are two topics I want to get into very quickly. So one is the business aspect of things. Pierre, you've just raised a round of funding. Congratulations. Hopefully the investors are in the room. How do you justify having 25% of your lab and their bandwidth dedicated to projects that are messy, back to that messiness, that don't have a strategic outcome that's laid out? And I'd like you to answer briefly, and also the rest of the panel to come in as well, because as you know, Henriette is has a philanthropic backing through the Luma Foundation, and Nick, it's another different dynamic from your side.
Yeah, so we just raised £10 million, and if we spend 25% on that on special projects that are very risky by nature, the propositions are half-baked, it is quite kind of like hard to say, we'll throw some chemists and engineers and designers and commercial team and production onto this. But actually, this is what creates the next generation of products. And I think giving ourselves this kind of like space to just kind of like mess around and use our facilities for things that are not directly kind of like validated with consumers and with kind of like manufacturing technologies is a huge part of our future own pipeline of products. So that's something that, hopefully investors are understanding more and more.
Yeah, shall I go? Yeah, I mean, you can call it messy. You can also call it experimental, maybe. I think it's really important now. We also are in a time of climate change, and where things are the world is very everything goes very fast. Ecosystems are very complex, and I think. You can call it a messy attitude, but you can also call it open, like open and experimental. And I think it's just very important to have this attitude to really work with ecosystems and work with the reality as it is now. And if you go to a place to prototype a system of production there, you have to deal with that. And that is just like, and if you come there with your a singular solution, you end up in a monoculture, and we all know that that is not what we need, because that is actually a destructive environment. So yeah, I think it's just this messiness it's key.
I could even go further than that. The head of my institution has a saying, which is, mess is the law. Not less is more, mess is the law. And that you can't really get to a point of a really great insight without a period of real confusion, of messiness, things being unclear. You can't have clarity if you haven't first had a lack of clarity. And that's particularly relevant to where we are now with the condition of the Earth, where we are geopolitically. Mess is definitely with us. And this notion of an ordered society, which did come out of the first industrial revolution in some respects, or an enlightenment at any rate, we now realize is something of a myth. And to be able to contend with, or at least conceptualize where the mess can get us to, is really a skill or an approach that designers learn to develop in their training. So, you know, this might sound a little self-serving, but I am going to hold up a placard and say design education, really, really important, and really worth supporting and engaging with, because things are not going to get simpler.
Thank you. In the last minute we have left, I want to touch on transformative partnerships, which are a key component of impactful design. Pierre, you work with Just Eat. It's quite a very much a transformative partnership. 30 seconds to tell us about what it takes for a transformative partnership to come together.
Simply, it takes a champion internally that is going to want to kind of like drive that change. It's very hard for large organizations to just get their head around how something that hasn't been proven could work for them. And at the end of the day, it's just one person that's going to be, okay, I'm gonna go for it, I'm gonna make it. And every partnership that we've had that has kind of like really worked was just down to one individual.
Thank you very much for your thoughts today. Thank you for joining us. Round of applause, please. Do I have sound? I do. Thank you. We're moving to the last part of this session with a chat with the designer that many of you will know. Guillaume Henri, please join us on stage. Welcome, Guillaume.
Hello.
So Guillaume has often been described as a nurse for sleeping beauties. And by that, I mean that you probably know the history of Nina Ricci and Carven, and now Jean Patou, transformed into Patou. It's a brand that's over 100 years old. And Guillaume has worked in the last, 20 years around resurrecting those beautiful brands. And it's very interesting that you're here, Guillaume, today, because I know that you've had a rather late awakening to the climate crisis. And there's absolutely no judgment here. I think we can all put our hand up that who feels that they've had a slightly too late awakening to the climate crisis. But we're all here now, which is fantastic. And you also know that fashion is at the core of the climate crisis and has created and is creating issues. Your own words, you are a repentant designer, a reformed designer. Can you tell us a bit more about that journey and how you live with that, how you carry that forwards in your work?
Okay, I'll do my best. Sometimes my English is not that good, so I'm already sorry for that. So yes, I've been designing for different fashion brands for a few years now. And something like a little more than 4 years ago, I left Nina Ricci after 3 years. In fashion, we don't really talk about years, we talk about seasons. So after like 6 or 8 seasons. And one day I was just sitting outside and I started to think about how many pieces I designed through that little career I had. And so I saw all the collection passing through my eyes. But suddenly I realized that those pieces were not only samples, they were pieces that you put in productions. So when I faced a dress, I literally saw 400 dresses arriving in my eyes. And it wasn't only like a collection, a series of hundreds of pieces, but like thousands and thousands of pieces. And I realized that maybe if I wanted to keep working in an industry, I should maybe consider that and try to do better in the future, definitely.
And as you built or rebuilt Patou from Jean Patou, you worked very much with a small team and in a startup setup. And going back to the shoe that should be considered first through its landscape, you spent a lot of time thinking about the landscape for your brand. You said, up to a year without actually designing a single item of clothing.
Yeah, actually, yeah, in the past, I would only think about design. So I would spend time with my team or in the office doing like sketches, choosing fabrics, and try to really challenge ourselves in terms of design. And that was the only thing we were thinking about. When we relaunched Jean Patou, first, let's be totally honest. There's already like so many clothes on the market. You know, there's no reason to not find anything to put on because there's like clothes all around us. And so I said to myself, there's only way to relaunch an old brand like Patou is to turn it into something new and to bring something a little positive in what this brand has to show and tell and sell because it's still an industry. And for a year, I wasn't even thinking about like a dress, a pant, or a jumper. I was thinking of how to do things better, who's the customer, what will be the distribution, and what's even like the life around the clothes. Not even about thinking about the clothes, but like, for example, what's the packaging? For example, I realized that from the moment a coat is done in a factory and the moment the coat arrives at a client's place, there's already like 3 different hangers. So at Patou, we decided that we're going to only do 1 hanger from the factory to the final client. And so that hanger has to be beautiful because you were talking earlier about desirability. Fashion is all about desirability. So it has to be appealing. It has to last, and it has to be positive. So we created that hanger. I mean, like that was like creating a car for me. It was so long, but it deserved it because now we're still using it, and we're really proud of it. And it's done out of recycled wood and recycled glue. Because I realized that glue could also be recycled, which is insane. I mean, so. And the packaging too. In the past, for me, the beauty of the packaging was important. It's still important. But it's not only that that matters. It's how it's done. Is it something positive for the planet, let's say? So that's the funny thing. In our packaging, we almost don't use any glue. It's all folded. It's done with waste of leather. At Patou, we don't do leather, apart from some dead stock of leather that we use for bags, for example. I prefer to call them sleeping stocks than dead stocks, but and we would work with a paper company, and they would turn that waste of leather from other brands into a paper exclusive for us. So that's the beauty of it. You can also do exclusive, beautiful things by using things that are the garbage of others. And I started my first dress maybe like 3 weeks before we had to show the collection to the press.
So you've crafted the landscape, you really labored over the crafting of that landscape. And then you decided to, I mean, you took quite a radical decision, which was to not have fashion shows.
Yeah.
So was that a purely economic decision?
In a way, yes, but not only. It was an economic decision because at least you can also put your energy onto something else, like how to do a pop-up store better, or how to, I mean, like, it's a lot of energy and it's a lot of money to put on a show. So we haven't done a show yet, but just to give you an example, that sounds so superficial when I say that, and I'm already so sorry for that. But anyway, to do a show with 40 looks, you need 80 pairs of shoes in order to be sure that the shoe gonna fit the girl. So it's already a production, which is stupid. So, for example, and we also decided at Patou that we can't be good at everything. So we decided to, if we have to do shoe with people that are good at it. If we want to do, like, last season we did that collaboration. I like the idea of collaboration too. It's really friendly. And then, for me, it's part of the value of Patou too. Because in Patou there is the nous, the vous. It's a very welcoming brand. And for example, we worked with Le Chameau because I wanted fashion is about desire. So sometimes you can't really explain. You want something, and it comes from somewhere. So I really felt for rubber hunting shoes. I thought they would be cool for next season. Okay, so I can enter that game and try to do my own rubber hunting shoe. But it's going to be a fortune. It's going to be chronophage. It's going to take a fortune and mean a lot of time. And people are really good at it. So we called them, and we created that shoe together. And it's Le Chameau and Patou. And I love those rencontres.
And so it's really about doing less and doing better that
Yes.
you're working on at Patou.
Oh, yes.
And this notion of collaboration that we touched on with the other speakers earlier, I mean, in a way, it's all the way through your brand, because every item has a QR code, and you can scan that QR code and see one of the many people, but the key artisan who worked on that particular jacket. How has that fostered collaboration within the team and also outside of the team?
In the fashion industry, we always, it started to change, which is a good thing. In the past, it was all about the designer. I would love the team to be there, actually, to talk about Patou. I think it's very important that we also show the beauty of the workers we work with. I told you once that, for example, if you put in a room all the person that are working on a jacket, just a single jacket, the room would be full of people, because there are the people in charge of the lining, the people that are in charge of the buttons, and all the factories and all the people that are making it, and the commercial team and the press team. I mean, it's crazy, the life around that item. And I thought it would be nice, not only nice, fair, to, we always want to show how perfect is what we do, because we don't want to be, I don't know, attaqué for anything. And sometimes I have the feeling that when we're talking about doing better, can make the people feel a little guilty, and I don't like that at all. At Patou, we're not perfect. We try our best. I mean, but it's a question of being open and friendly and to tell things. Again, we have the QR code inside the clothes. If you want to use it, you're more than welcome. If you don't, fair enough. It's just about like how you like the jumper or not. But if you scan the clothes, then you're going to meet even the woman who's stitching the dress in the factory, and she's going to talk about her job. And because they love what they do. And to be transparent is not only by saying, okay, my factory is great. I do so many controls. I have that perfect label. That's great. But it's also important, I think, to make the people talk and to show faces. I think that's key.
I think we all know here that perfection is very suspicious when it comes to climate change, so we can completely embrace that concept. And over the last, you've been in this industry for a while now, and has your personal view of desirability of what luxury is, whether it's around sobriety, whether it's around materials, has that evolved for you?
But what did evolve is the fact that in the past I would only focus on what I see. I wasn't really into the backstory, I have to say. And everything was hidden. That was, like in the fashion industry, you had to hide things. It's like you were talking a lot about food. I love food too, and we are always comparing what we do with the food industry at Patou. For example, I remember that in Paris in the past, you had to choose between a very posh restaurant or a brasserie, and you have your croque monsieur. But in between, nothing really existed. And now, like, being a chef is cooler than being a designer or a fashion designer. It's sexy now, and the kitchens are open, and you see the people, and the music is nice, and it's, where all the ingredients in the plate comes from, but it's also beautiful and tasty, and it's not only about what you see, it's about like what's around. It's important to know if the people that are making it are happy, and now I see a clothes, and I'm not only concerned about the beauty of it aesthetically, but sometimes it's obvious when you see the pain on something, and sometimes you just think you just see things and you're like, do we need it? For example, at Patou, we won't do a plain white shirt because I know where to buy it.
I'll tell you.
Yeah. So it has to be special. Again, at Patou, you know, talking again about the food industry, my mother always told me that if you enter a restaurant, if there's too many things on the menu, it's a little scary. I didn't know why, because for me it was being generous, but no, you can't cook all that. And at Patou, for example, we do very small collections. Because again, you don't need 8 coats a season. So we do 2 coats, for example, in winter. We also at Patou, trying to find, again, this example of the food industry, we deliver winter in winter and summer in summer. Because by asking, who is my customer, I realized that my customers are my friends, and my friends, they wear coats when they're cold. You know, and in the fashion industry, you had to do fur in June, and
did you have to push back to have that enabled? I mean, or was that accepted within the wider group?
You know, the first time we did show our collection to the clients worldwide, saying them, we're gonna deliver winter in winter and summer in summer, which is like 6 months after the others, we thought they would get mad. But actually they told us, you know what? Some clothes are waiting on hangers for months. So thanks to try that. And we tried, because it's always trying. And it works.
And just before we close, I want to come back on materials. I know a lot of you are thinking about future materials and past materials, how we bring them into the future. You have a particular attitude to materials at Patou and the innovation around those materials and the durability of them. Could you talk a little bit about how, because obviously, you know, you're under pressure to constantly reinvent. How does that work for you in your brand ethic?
Again, by talking about the food industry, I do think that you don't have to change your menu every season. So, for example, there is some fabrics that we adore, and we worked really closely that first strategic year with factories to create our own poplin. That poplin is organic and it's all transparent. We worked with another company on doing a file done out of a 100% polyester, recycled polyester. So we've got like 80% of our fabrics that are fabric that we show every single season. They're all recycled or organic. And we would add some other fabrics just to bring the newness in the season. So it was a long process at the beginning to find that. But I'm happy because with time, for me, the quality is not only about the offer the product you offer, but it's also the quality of work. So now that we found that poplin, we don't have to, you know, like to challenge ourselves, like every season to find a new one. And in the past, that would be the case. I would change my mind every 2 months to prove that I had new ideas, and that's a waste. And talking about using the fabrics like from a season to another, it also helps the deliveries and the price point too, because by using the same fabric every single season, you can almost like face a huge amount of quantity, and bigger is the production, and smaller is the price for the final customer, which is good.
Thank you. And just to close, really, I mean, you don't sound like a reform designer so much as a designer engagé in all these actions that you take. So congratulations for that. And it's a winding road for all of us, and we all try to play our part. But how do you feel about the rest of the industry? Is that a conversation you have with your colleagues, or is that a very complicated conversation to have within that
No,
industry.
it's definitely changing, like 100%. I'm lucky enough to work at Patou that, as I told you, is an old brand, but we had the chance to recreate in a way. So I had no other choice that embracing those values by doing something new. Most of the brands, they have to change, and that's much more challenging in a way. So that takes time, but you can already see that things are changing. The new generation, you know, at Patou, I'm definitely the oldest, and I'm working with like 20, 22 years old kids. They're amazing about that. It's crazy, and it's not only about the final product, but the way we work in house. It's something that they have with them like every single day, and that's beautiful.
So just like Nick Rhodes earlier, you're a co-learner alongside your younger colleagues.
I'm still learning, which is great.
Thank you very much, Guillaume,
Thank
Henri,
you.
for being with us today.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time today. Just before we wrap the session, I just want to take you through the journey that we took, through designers taking their briefs directly from nature, some local, some global, the partnerships, the transformative partnerships that are at the core of impactful design, the magic that happens at that intersection of ecosystems, and also the challenges of making it happen through industries like the fashion industry and business in general. But please, before you go, could you take a moment to just think about how you can be a part of that solution, just by stepping out of your comfort zone towards that fertile intersectionality. Think about one thing you can change today to make more space in your life for the joy and the fertility of that messiness. And let it change you, and then change the world. Thank you.